Alright, so right off the bat, I just want to get this out of the way. This video is a challenge. As anybody who's followed our channel before, or honestly even just opens up the main page of it, knows, we take a really long time to make stuff. And I, believe it or not, want to make more stuff. So, this video will be made in one day. And whatever is done by midnight today is what will go live at 3 p.m. tomorrow. Or, well, today for the 4th if you're watching this when it actually comes out. So, without wasting any more time, this is the real story of Titanfall. About 7.5 years ago, I was browsing through my family's EA Play subscription, and I saw this amazing looking game with this cool little fella standing in front of a giant robot the size of my freaking house. And what wasn't to love? I was a sci-fi fan even then, and once I watched the trailer, I mean, I'll let it speak for itself.
It was only a matter of time.
All of our fight, all of our sacrifice has bought us this one day.
It's a hard life keeping the peace on the frontier. Everyone has their limits.
Titanfall 1 hooked me almost instantly. I was absolutely terrible and probably screwed over every team I ever played with. Even with the beyond overpowered smart pistol as a primary, not a boost, I barely hit my shots and had a flat out bad setup for my Titan. I chose everything that looked cool and exploded. I'd show you my old account, but EA pulled the game from their storefront a year or two ago now, and I never actually purchased it before it was too late. And yet, my terribleness never bothered me. Maybe it was because I was young and just didn't care, but I think it's just flat out one of the magic things about Titanfall, even now. It never matters if you are totally lost or out-fragging the entire leaderboard. It's just flat out fun. Swinging through the sky, sieging Typhon with the boys, or even getting squashed beneath the metaphorical and literal boot of another team's Titans. I always find myself grinning like an idiot, and often catch myself leaning back and forth in sync with my grapples in games. Majority of the montages I've uploaded, I'm doing that. You can't see because there's no webcam, but believe me. It was Christmas Day of 2016. I found a small wrapped rectangular box sitting under the tree, taped on top of a much larger square box. Obviously I start with the big one, I mean, come on. And I cracked it open to find a brand new controller. Great. But when I opened the second box, there was Titanfall 2. 6 years, 8 months, and 24 days ago. And I have not stopped playing since. I have vivid memories sitting on the floor that Christmas day. As everybody else around me was doing the normal Christmas partying and, you know, food is being served, whatever, there I was, sitting on a beanbag chair in my living room, playing Titanfall. I think I finished that entire campaign in about a week, which on my limited time to play at that time in my life was fast, really fast. And from that point on, I was hooked. Because again, the struggle was fun. I was horrible. And coming from Halo MCC, being able to jump on any wall, swing with a grappling hook on any surface, it felt groundbreaking. It was something I'd never seen before at the time. And literally only a year or two ago did Halo catch up and essentially rip off Titanfall's grapple hook. And in my opinion, they did it worse. Titanfall 2 was the first time that the Titanfall franchise really felt like a competitor to the Halo experience. It had an equally unique sandbox and a real campaign rather than needing to piecemeal the story from the multiplayer, and an element of its own in the form of the Titans. For obvious reasons, this is what I consider to be the golden age of the game. Player counts were high, everybody was learning together, and updates, despite my complete blindness to them, were consistent. With all the game modes and new ones coming weekly, it always felt like there was something to do within the game. We're gonna move now into what I would consider the silver age of Titanfall, I suppose. There was a kid in my middle school, we'll call him Tony, and Tony was known for being good at pretty much any and every game on Xbox. The dude played enough where he could unironically flex his finger muscles, and by now, I'd been playing Titanfall for about a year. MCC still dominated the vast amount of my time because it was split screen, I could play with other people. But ultimately, whenever I was on my own, Titanfall 2 was my go-to. I mentioned Tony because I managed to beat him consistently in Titanfall, and as depressing as it is to say, I was proud of that. However, looking back at all this now, I came to realize that one of Titanfall's biggest strengths at the time was also one of its greatest downfalls, its movement system. As someone who had to recently write a game design paper on the game, believe me when I say I've gone through a lot about the movement system and mechanics of Titanfall as a whole, and what I came to realize was that the system is ultimately set up in a way that's easy to learn and hard to master, which sounds great when you look at it initially. You want every game to be set up like that. But what I now realize is that the reason I beat Tony is because he was a COD guy, as most people were at the time. Going back a bit and taking a look at a Forbes list, shows that Overwatch, Titanfall 2, Doom 2016, Battlefield 1, and Call of Duty were their top 5 games of the year. You notice any outlier in there? Titanfall was the only movement shooter of the bunch. It was one of the only ones of its time. And in the modern era where everyone's rediscovering the game, sure, these kinds of systems seem second nature. Games have gotten more fast-paced. But back when Dead by Daylight, Halo, and COD were the superpowers they're still known as today, Titanfall just didn't fit. New players just stay on flat surfaces, maybe occasionally jumping on a wall, but never be swinging around with a grapple or phasing its enemies with Ronin. All these mechanics and fast pacing just didn't fit in the admittedly slower paced gameplay of the era. And while yes, I would never in a million years consider Doom slow, the type of fast pacing was very different between the two games. I think the learning curve, therefore, was far harsher back then to keep up with. The people who had been playing since release had mastered the game, and as such, pushed potential new people who were less familiar with this type of PvP away from the game. So now what? Well, by this point, updates had slowed substantially. The last major content update came in the form of Operation Frontier Shield, introducing the PvE game mode Frontier Defense to the multiplayer, and the only players that remained were those dedicated mechanical masters, and the younger siblings of them who borrowed their Xboxes to play the cool robot game. The game had faded so far into obscurity that I can't even really blame Respawn for abandoning it after only a year. Everyone assumed they were preparing to launch a third entry to the franchise, and I don't consider this period the Dark Ages yet because the community still held out hope. And why wouldn't they? Titanfall 2 released a short 2 years after the first game. So updates stopping a year into the sequel's release made sense, so now the studio could go full steam ahead on the hotly anticipated Titanfall 3. But by now, even I had stopped playing the game as much. It was my go-to home from school early sort of game. But that meant at most 20 to 30 minutes a day, a match or two. Then I'd move on. I was good by now, very good. I was averaging in the range of 200 to 300 point scores on my own, in the 650 total point attrition matches. But every day I logged in, even I began to notice a steadily declining online players counter. However, at this point, the game still worked, the community held out hope, and new strategies were still being developed. Everything still felt fresh, and as such, no one really had any reason to lose respect for the at the time brand new and revolutionary Respawn Entertainment. They weren't seen as EA at this point, they were seen as a ragtag group that split off from COD to make their own dream game, and we all assumed they were going to continue that story. I don't think anybody at this time would have predicted what was to come.
Liberation from the IMC brought chaos to the Outlands, and the revival of an old blood sport. Some legends fight for fortune, others answers. But we shall all be forged in the glorious realm.
Mirage, quiet.
I believe with 10 kills, the loot should be mine.
That's a made-up number.
Game over. Thanks for playing.
After 2 years of what felt like a weird middle ground, the silence was finally broken, and what we got was, well, amazing! An expanded Titanfall lore with a whole new blood sport seemingly built by the Apex Predators? Were we going to find out where Blisk went after he left us to die on the Ark? Who were all these new characters? And the grapple making return on a modified Marvin? That seems awesome! I'm guessing that most of the community saw what I didn't at this point, and that this marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. And what was that new era? Money. More money than Respawn could possibly imagine. They went from a peak couple thousand players on a niche paid FPS to the world's largest free-to-play battle royale overnight, logging millions of daily active users at its peak, spawning an entire competitive esports culture around itself, and for a period being one of Twitch's most viewed games on the platform, still holding a respectable spot to this day, and with a cast of quippy, likable characters to boot, and a wide selection of weapons and gear to choose from. What wasn't to love? What I didn't realize at the time was that Apex was not Titanfall. They weren't even in the same universe, despite the IMC Easter egg in the very first trailer. This shift didn't just mark a shift in Respawn's focuses, it marked a shift in their culture, their public perception. They were still Respawn at this point, the developers I'd always call out as my favorites when somebody would ask, but now their game had microtransactions, an in-your-face cosmetic system, and a battle pass? Titanfall 2 was commended on having a very only if you want it in-game transaction setup, and this felt foreign, not like them. One might even say an EA-esque move. But it didn't matter to me at the time. My Titanfall still worked if I ever wanted to go back, and now I had a brand new fresh game that my friends were actually interested in joining in on. As Apex's distance from the Titanfall universe became more and more apparent, so does Respawn's own distance from the franchise. A year or two into Apex's lifespan, the cracks in Titanfall began to show far more prominently. The remaining player base was getting restless, almost zealot-like, heralding the game as some overshadowed example of FPS perfection. By now even I had fallen into this sort of despair, making the switch to my now main PC account and uploading the worst Kraber montage the internet has ever seen in the form of Boom, calling the game Respawn's Forgotten FPS. It was more than common to hear people blaming EA for Titanfall's failure due to the release window between COD and Battlefield, and while this obviously didn't help the game in the slightest, I don't think it's the full picture. As I mentioned in the beginning of this video, Titanfall's problem was never a release window, and while I do believe it would have done better released at a less kneecapping time, I stand by that the game's biggest issue was its difference from games of the era. People recognize Titanfall for its incredible campaign and unique multiplayer experience from the very beginning, as exemplified by that Forbes article I talked about earlier, and by an early spike in the Google Trends data. People were looking this game up, they were interested. But the community having gotten so good from such an early point meant that no new players were able to funnel in. Regardless, the community just didn't care. This was all Big Bad EA's fault, and our perfect Respawn Entertainment would never screw over their own game so bad, and blah blah blah, who cares? We were in denial. We didn't see the writing on the wall. Almost all of the original team at Respawn that had made the Titanfall universe so compelling were gone. Respawn had become just another cog in EA's money-pumping machine, and while yes, they were still making great stuff, the magic was gone. Titanfall's servers progressively fell into further and further disrepair. Legendary content creators of the game were forced to go get real jobs from the borderline non-existent remaining viewer base, and the few of us that had stuck around were forced to just watch this all happen. I don't blame Respawn, and frankly I don't think anyone should. At the end of the day, they were a company, and they need to be making the choices that put food on the table for their now almost 1,000 employees. But with so many employees, what happened next seemed impossible. I don't think I could ever do justice to the full DDOSing situation. I honestly think a documentary, or honestly even reality TV show, could be made about that disaster in and of itself. So I'm just going to be focusing on the effect it had, not what actually happened. If you are interested in that, however, I found a Game Rant article that covers most of the situation, and I'm going to be leaving that in the description. Anyways, this was seemingly the final nail in the game's coffin. As Titanfall was dying the slow death to Apex, the servers fell to a point of near unplayability. At this time, it was very common to see a speed hacker blitzing around the map at Mach 10, or to have a server just unexpectedly die mid-match. The The community was outraged, going so far as to hack into Respawn's Apex servers to try to raise awareness. But this, big surprise I'm sure, had the opposite effect, leading to an even greater rift between Apex and Titanfall. It was more common than not to see players on the subreddit calling Apex a terrible money-sucking game that was just a shadow of the absolute perfection that was Titanfall 2. A few reasonable people, myself included, still saw the value in both games. I very much consider myself an Apex fan, even to this day, but it was near impossible to get a word in as the community watched the game it loved slowly die with 1,000 developers doing nothing to stop it. As corny as it may be, in the darkest hour of Titanfall's history, there was one group genuinely working to save the game. Not the con artists over at Save Titanfall, but instead, Northstar.
A pilot stands before you. Respect is due.
This is the moment of a lifetime. The clock's ticking like my lifeline. Until I flatline, I push it to the red line. Who gon' stop me high? Who gon' stop me high? Breathtaking a move that I make. I give it everything I got. With the will to be great. Hold up. The soul of a legend with the will to be great. Hold up. They gon' stop me in my moment. They gon' stop me when I'm on it. They can't break me, I don't back down. I'm like a king, give me my crown. They gon' stop me. They gon' stop me high. Like a king, give me my crown.
Let us begin.
Who gon' stop me in my moment? Who gon' stop me when I'm going? They can't break me, I don't back down. I'm like a king, give me my crown. They can't break me, I don't back down. I'm like a king, give me my crown.
Full credit to Smurfson for that trailer. I was going to edit it down, but honestly it's so well made I couldn't figure out where to actually cut the footage. The effect that Northstar had on Titanfall was flat out game-saving, and I honestly cannot imagine there'd be a community for Respawn to resurrect today if this mod hadn't released. Even though I was someone who mainly stuck it out in the main servers, I was still going for G100 Kraber after all. All the custom and actually functional game modes, and even the ability for everyone to host their own servers felt incredible. And the best part was, it couldn't be DDoSed. If a player-hosted server ever went down, 5 more cropped up to fill in the gap. And because there were active admins, cheaters actually got banned. The Titanfall community by this point had begun to lose hope, but Northstar managed to come in when all else seemed lost and turn the game into something I don't think the developers could have ever imagined it becoming. Finally today, we are almost 7 years into this game's lifespan. Titanfall 3 in reality became the basis of Apex, with many of the maps and ideas making their way into the arena modes. And it feels like Titanfall 2 is more alive than ever. There are new videos being actively made, the main servers actually work, and those diverse weekly game modes from the early release years are back in rotation. I've heard whispers about a Titanfall 3 finally being created, and while now does seem like a more likely time than ever, with Jedi Survivor finally being behind Respawn, my expectations are low. The Titanfall community has held out hope for years of a Titanfall 3. Hell, we all expected it back in 2018 and 19 with the lead up and release of Apex. Even if the game came out today, I don't think it'd be able to recapture that zealot-like community and adrenaline-pumping gameplay of the originals. What I do hope to see is some kind of second life for Titanfall 1, a way for the franchise to be immortalized so we can enjoy Titanfall for what it was, and let this now flourishing community of modders and Northstar be the ones to push the franchise forwards. A bad threequel to this franchise would be worse than just leaving it at 2, and it feels like everyone already has their own ideas of how the story of Jack Cooper ended. As the title says, Protocol 3, protect the pilot. And I'd like to thank you all so much for watching. I know, I said the end, whatever, but this video is a little weird because it's not just about Titanfall, it's about making videos as well. And I gotta admit, the beginning was a lie. I'm just gonna be upfront about that. The reality was that I was writing the beginnings of this script on Thursday and Friday in the middle of an English class. When I got home on Friday, I was tired and unmotivated and didn't finish much outside of the gameplay, which was terrible, by the way, due to said tiredness. I was then up editing till 4 a.m. on Saturday night, the day it was originally meant to go live, of course, and I'm still editing it at 2:15 p.m. today, an hour before this is all meant to go live. However, I learned a lot during that process, and I realized that sometimes constant image spamming on the screen isn't necessary. I think this video did end up a bit more bare bones than I'd have liked it to be, but I think it'll also help me move towards a sort of middle ground between the 146 images in 8 minutes of footage on the FTM video and this one that is primarily just the gameplay footage. If anyone has any suggestions on what I can improve editing and voiceover wise, please let me know. It can be hard to step back from something I've put so much time into, so suggestions are genuinely appreciated. I'll be live today in, if everything goes according to plan, about an hour. So if Sea of Thieves challenge streams is something you're interested in, stop by and say hello. I'd love to open a conversation about this topic and other topics on the channel. If you enjoyed what you saw, that little red button below the video is always appreciated. And if this is the last video of ours you ever watch, I hope you have a great rest of your life.